So let's move on to the next section here, that is creation of management groups, subscriptions, and resource groups. Okay, so if you look at resource groups over here, anyone who's new to Azure, they might find it difficult, but people who have been working with Azure, this is a fundamental aspect of any resource that you create within Azure platform. Okay, so once it comes to resource groups, these are fundamental aspects of your environment. And if you see the diagram over here, it's a logical grouping. So dotted lines that you see, this is the reason because it is a logical grouping. It's not a physical grouping. So for a given customer, for a given project, for a given department, right? For a POC environment, you might go ahead and create a resource group here. Within that resource group, you'll have relevant resources within that. And this ties to the entire resource life cycle. So even for a project, before I forget this, let me mention it over here. The resource group is a logical grouping, and one can create resource group based on the internal teams that we have in terms of server management, in terms of storage, right? Security, right? So depending upon whatever teams we have internally, we can create resource groups as per that, or we can create resource groups based on the client, right? We can create resource groups based on the project that we are creating. We can create resource groups based on the client departments that we have. So for which department you're doing that project, you can create resource groups based on the environment that you are creating, which could be staging, production, dev test environment, right? So you decide what is the parameter or what is the grouping that you would want to create when you are looking at a resource group. Now the question over here is, the challenge over here is you can choose only one of these members over here, which means I can't create something like I have a client. For that client, I want to create a resource group for that. Within that, create number of projects. For each project, I have a resource group. For within that project is done for a specific department, and it is dev test or staging environment, right? So you can't create a hierarchy of that, right? So you can have only one resource group here. So if I choose for a say client department, what do I do for other parameters, right? So what we can do over here is we can create something called as resource tags. And by using this resource tags, you can do your grouping over here. Okay, does this make sense? So you can create respective groups over here with resource group, and within that resource group, for every resource you can specify a tag. So using the tag name, you can mention your details, whether it is for which client, it is for which particular environment, right? So those things we can mention by using resource tags. Does it make sense to everyone? Every resource that you create within your Azure environment, it has to be part of a resource group. You cannot create a resource which is not within a resource group. If you want to move your resources across resource groups or across subscriptions, you can do that. You cannot rename a resource group. So please be careful of that. You can't rename the resource group. You can create a new resource group and you can move your resources from one resource group to second resource group. If you look at organization of resource groups, I have already mentioned about this. So you can have your resource-based grouping, database resource group, VM resource group, right? You can have department-based resource groups. You can have environment-based resource group, department-wise resource group. So you decide how do you want to create it, right? So as a consulting organization, what we do is we use team-wise resource groups because we have large set of teams at our side and we work for multiple customers, right? So keeping that kind of requirement in mind, we have our own teams over here. So once we get a project requirement, we collate, we sit with the number of team members and assign tasks to each of these team members. So server team will do a VM creation, security team will look at the security aspects of it, right? So they create their resources within their respective resource group. Once they have those resources created, they will go and specify using a tag that this resource is for which customer, this resource is for which type of environment, whether it is for dev test, for staging, for production. So it's totally up to you. How do you want to create this? And this will differ from organization to organization. So there's no fixed rule saying that this is the only way of creating a resource group. Now, apart from these attributes which I have mentioned, you can also make use of resource group from authorization perspective, checking for life cycle of resources, billing of your entities over here. Let me show you some examples of this. Let me go to the subscription which I have. Within this, let me go ahead and create a resource group. I already have a lot of resource groups over here. So once your job is done, once your lab is completed, I would recommend everybody delete the resource group that you have created. It will automatically remove all the resources that is there inside that resource group. As and when required, we can create our resources once again. So I've removed multiple resource groups. It will take some time to impact. Meanwhile, that happens. Let's proceed further. Let's add a new resource group here. So every time or every resource that you create, you'll see a documentation link over here. So anyone who is new to Azure, I would recommend read about these entities. What is the resource group? What is the purpose of resource group?
Well, can we add the tags to the also resource groups? I mean, you can add, but what's the purpose?
Yes. You can add a tag to a resource group as well. You're right. The core purpose is in terms of identification or any other meta information that you would want for your resource group. That meta information you can mention by using the tags over here.
Okay.
Okay. So let's go ahead. Specify the name of the resource group. Let's specify the region for it. As far as tags are concerned, okay. whatever details that you want to mention over here. In terms of tags, you can mention it. So once you have this resource group, you can create resources inside that. Now, if you see the last slide that we are mentioning about, I have any resources right now. So as I move ahead, I will create those resources within your resource group organization. Organizing for authorization. So you can go to access control IAM, identity and access management. You can specify which users will have what permissions on the underlying environment. So which users will have owner role, contributor role, what is the role that user will have over here, or any specific rules for that for a service you want, you can mention that as well. You want to assign it to a user group or a service principal, right? The main entity over here is service principal. Along with this, the second option you have is managed identity. Now, what is this managed identity? Some of you all may be already aware about, or we'll come to this in the second last session, where we'll be discussing more about the identity piece of it. Where we'll discuss about the security aspects of it. Okay, so this is the first member. Second member here is organizing the life cycle. So like I showed you, once I delete the resource group, all the resources within that will get deleted. Third section that we have is in terms of policies that you want to create. So any policy that you create over here will apply to that resource group. Okay. Any policy that you create can be applied to a specific resource group. Along with this, you'll be able to see cost management as an important section over here. So if I have a limit, cost limit for any for a set of virtual machines, or there's a cost limit for a resource group, or where I have a client project being deployed, right? Say for example, dev test. I don't want the cost to go beyond $1,000, something like that. So all those things I can specify within the resource group. Now, since this is a new resource group, I don't have any details over here, so it's all showing empty. Right? So cost analysis, cost alerts, any kind of budgets you want to allocate, so all these things you can do it on a resource group level. Right? So this is what is meant by organizing for billing. I hope you are clear with this. Organizing for authorization, life cycle, and billing.
So, Subhash, all the resources are under resource group, correct?
Yes, all resources are under resource group.
After we create the resources, also we can move to the particular resource group, correct?
Yes. First of all, you can't create a resource without a resource group.
Oh, okay, okay.
After creating a resource in one resource group, you can move it to another resource group as well. That's possible.
So if I am creating a VM mission,
okay,
and we have to assign a resource group, correct?
Right. The moment you get a virtual machine, the first question it will ask you is,
yes,
you
yes,
want
yes.
me to create this in which resource group?
Right, yeah.
Second member that you see over here is in terms of management groups, right? So what is this management group over here? Now many people have this question to me, Om Prakash, when Subhash, as far as Subhash, when we go and create these resources over here, right? When we create these resources over here, I can organize them in terms of resource groups. I can organize them in terms of within one subscription. I can have multiple resource groups. then why would an organization want to go for multiple subscriptions? Why would an organization want to go for multiple subscriptions? Now, generally, when we are creating any large projects or complex projects, here you have options for different kind of POCs that we are creating or resource that we are creating, right? So you have your enterprise subscriptions over here. You may have a dev test subscription. Different subscriptions may have their own cost advantages as well, right? So if you go for a dev test subscription or MCT subscription or MSDN subscriptions, each of them will have their cost benefits as well, which means a VM, if I create it in one subscription versus I get the VM in another subscription, which may be cheaper, right? So based on that, I can create number of subscriptions. Now, lot of organizations which are MNCs, right? And they have number of branches, number of departments, and each departments, each business units have their own cost heads, right? So what they would do is they would, for their tasks or their marketing or finance kind of things or sales campaigns that they are creating, they may go ahead and purchase a subscription. They will get their tasks done, and that subscription is lying around, right? So a lot of organizations could have such kind of scenarios as well, where there are multiple subscriptions. So when you have multiple such subscriptions, how do you manage them? How do you organize them effectively? So those things can be done by using management groups. So the kind of policies that we saw, the kind of access management that we discussed on the most basic unit, even those kind of things can exist on the management group as well. So topmost, if you see the diagram over here on your right hand side, the topmost entity over here is the root management group. Within that, you will have your sub management groups, human resources, apps, production, right? Even geographically, we can have management groups. Within that, you can have your respective subscription. Again, once it comes to management groups, these are logical in nature. They are not physical. In sense, if I say uh, East US region, in that East US region, I can't use subscription which is for West US region or resources which is for another region. So these are not physical, these are logical. It will help you to organize your resources better, create your policies in much more better manner, and work with it. So if you look at the hierarchy here, this is how it goes. So topmost you have root management group. Within root management group, you'll have your management groups. Within management groups, you'll have your respective subscriptions. Now, you can have subscriptions directly inside root management group as well. You can have your subscription directly inside root management group as well, right? Now, within subscriptions, you'll have your resource groups. So this is how it is being organized. So something that you want to apply throughout the organization. Something that you want to apply throughout the organization, all resource groups, all subscriptions, you'll put it, all management groups, you'll put it over here. Something that you would want for a specific region, you'll put that into management group, right? Something that you would want to put on all resource groups, those things you'll specify on the subscription level, right? Something that you want to apply on all the resources, that you'll put it on resource group level. So depending upon what is the scope that you want to create for your policies, for your rights management services, right? So those things we mentioned those things we mentioned using the management group. Okay, so I hope this makes sense to you in terms of significance of management groups. Let me show you a quick example over here of how do you create a how do you see a management group before we actually go and create one. So in your Azure portal, just type management groups, and here you'll be able to see your root group. So by default, everyone will have a root group, tenant root group. You can see that. Within tenant root group, you'll be able to see the options over here. So what are the subscriptions within that environment, within that root group, any kind of governance policies in context of security policy, what are the policies that you want to create over here. So if you'll see, there are more than 600 policies by default available. I will discuss about policies in more details once I go to governance section. So you'll see there are 643 policies. So depending upon what is your requirement and where am I right now, I'm right now on the root group level. So any policy which I create over here will apply to all members, apply to all child management groups, subscriptions, and resource group. Right? So certain things which I want to block on the organization level, I'll do it over here. Along with this, your cost analysis budgets that I want for the entire cloud budgets which I want for the entire organization, I'll put it over here. So here you all will be able to see the graphs which I was mentioning about. So what has been the consumption, right? For specific location, what has been the cost over here, total subscription, how much money I have spent, which services I have been spending these resources. So maximum amount you'll see 4,000 rupees has gone for storage. Second is SQL database, 136 rupees. Okay, so these resources you can specify on your tenant root group or subsequent management groups. Does it make sense to everyone?
Okay, good question.
Yeah, go ahead.
So the portal, you'll have for each subscription there can be a different portal user ID, correct?
For each subscription there can be different account. Yes.
So you don't have to come from root management, correct?
No.
So everybody can see
root management is. That's a very good question. Can everybody see root management? Not necessary. You'll have to specify permissions. So for example, right now, if I'm not mistaken, none of y'all have that permission unless y'all have made this change. So y'all need to go to your Active Directory. Within Active Directory, you have to go to your properties. And if you go to the last one, can you see this? So it says access management for Azure resources, right? So this particular user can manage access to all Azure subscriptions and management groups in the tenant. Unless I give this permission, unless I elevate the user, I will not get the permissions over here. I will not be able to. Okay. So unless I give permissions to this user, I will not, that user will not be able to access the root management group. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, I just actually I'm using my office ID and I tried to go in the management group and it said you do not have access. Maybe that's the reason.
Absolutely correct.
But if I have,
you brought that point.
have multiple subscriptions, who gets the access?
Sorry, once again.
In an organization, let's say we have HR department, they have 2 subscription, finance have 3.
Right.
So each individual subscription will have their own portal, correct?
It's not that way. The portal is single. There are not multiple portals. What you said rightly is there should be permissions. So which users have permissions on all those subscriptions? That would be the right point.
Okay, so they will have their corresponding subscription, but not access to root management.
That's correct.
Okay.
Okay. The portal basically is an application which will help you to work with number of Azure resources and
Correct.
Azure subscriptions. So if you want to access the management group, you'll have to, like I showed you, the permissions, right? You'll have to get that limited permission onto all those subscriptions. Only then you can manage it in a single manner. So there will be a specific team within an organization, which is the cost management team, right? So the cost management team will have all those permissions. So the global administrator.
Okay.
Subhash, like one quick question. Since I'm using my Office ID and that subscription doesn't have access to this management group and all, do you suggest me to create one more, my individual, to practice and all?
Very right question. Do not use Office subscription.
Okay.
Do not use Office subscription because you will unnecessarily create any new resource over there and there will be a cost incurred and that you could get into a trouble.
Yeah.
Don't create anything on Office subscription, Office environment, Office subscription. Create your
Okay.
own personal account, personal Outlook ID, Hotmail ID or Live ID, and create a free trial within that.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Along with this, you all will also not have permissions on your Office Active Directory. I'm not sure at what level y'all are working, but y'all may not have permissions to all the resources within your, even if you have access to a subscription, you may not have access to all the resources, or there will be some policies or restrictions over there. Okay.
Yep. Thank you.
But could you ask that question? Any such questions or confusion that you have, please ask.
In AWS, you can log in as a root and you can log in as a user. Like you can add this as a root as a user also. So I think it's inside, that's outside in AWS.
I have not worked extensively with AWS, so I'm not sure on that. But
Yeah.
here, once it comes to Azure Active Directory, you are a subscription owner, which means you have created that subscription under your account. So that makes you become a root, and in sense, global admin. Once you are within Active Directory, you create your users inside that, and you can log in as a user. So here, once I have my account created, within my Azure environment, I can go and add multiple users. So you can see this, right? So I've added multiple users here: Dylan, Joseph, Sync admin. These are number of users which I have created, and I can log in as any one of these users.
But they will not have any root privileges.
They will not have root privileges. That's right, unless I make them a global admin.
Yeah. The only reason we created for the escalated privileges, correct?
That's right. So any additional things that they would want to do, any specialized activities they would want to do, only in those scenarios I will do that.
I have one more question, like it's an extension to Gopi's question actually. So Gopi asked, like a user in an organization can have multiple subscriptions. Is it possible?
Slight correction over there. A user in an organization can be associated with multiple subscriptions. Yes.
Yeah. So when a user try to log in, like does it ask the user while login which subscription you want to go in? Does it ask while login or?
It does not. Once you have logged in successfully, can you see this?
Yeah.
On right
So
hand
you
side,
switch to,
I
oh,
can
you
move,
switch to,
I can
okay.
switch to a directory.
Oh, okay.
So I can switch to a specific directory to whichever I want. And
Okay.
each directory will be mapping to a separate subscription.
Yeah. Okay.
Actually, for us, Guru, when you create a subscription, with a subscription, you cannot create resources. And to add a subscription, you need to give your credit card information. Otherwise, you cannot create any of the resources.
I would slightly disagree with that. When
Oh,
you
okay.
say credit card comes as part of your free trial creation or pay as you go model creation.
Yeah, pay as you
If
go.
you're
But
using
again,
something like
yeah, pay as
if
you
you're
go.
something like yes. So depending upon which resource you are creating and which type of subscription you are creating, you'll be using your details over there.
Okay.
So another aspect over here is your subscription limits and quotas. So once it comes to cloud resources, right? So we have already mentioned that as far as cloud is concerned, it has infinite set of resources, bottomless storage, infinite compute, right? But there will always be limits over here. These are soft limits. So if you need to go beyond this, you'll have to raise a ticket with Microsoft and they can raise the limits for your subscription. At times, it may happen that you are not knowingly creating it. Some application has misbehaved and it is going on creating more and more resources in a recurring manner, right? So it becomes a big issue for us. So keeping that kind of requirements in mind or keeping that kind of challenges in mind, you can have a limit to your subscriptions over here. So if you look at your management groups or if you look at your resource groups, each of them will have respective limits over here. To identify for each of these resources, what are the limits that we have? Say, for example, you can't create more than 10,000 management groups. That's a limit that we have. So just go through the URL which I have shared. Okay, so management group limits, your subscription limits, how many co-admins that you can add over here, like how many resource groups you can have per subscriptions, 980 resource groups within one subscription. Now these limits are pretty high. These limits are pretty high, but still, if you have already reached 980 resource groups within a subscription, you'll have to take up a new subscription. You can't continue further with the same. Within resource group, how many resources you can create? So you can check your entities over here. So restrictions for Active Directory, restrictions for API management. So for each service, you'll have a respective limit. Again, I'll go back to my previous point, which I mentioned. You'll have to look at your customer requirements. Check for what are the limits over here, how much maximum resources you can create. And if customer has anything beyond this, then you'll have to organize or re-architect your resources in such a way that you can easily sail around with these limits. Or raise a ticket with Microsoft and get this result. Okay, so this was a quick look in terms of management groups, resource groups. I showed you one of the examples of resource groups. I did not show you an example of how to create a management group. So let me go to management groups. Here, I can add a management group. Let me specify whatever name I want. So tenant root group will be at the top level. Within that, whatever child groups that you want to create. Okay, so if you see the message over here, it says it may take around 45 minutes, but it doesn't happen that way. It performs much quicker than that. So you can see the CF group over here. You can make it part of another management group as well. Okay, so you'll remember the hierarchy which I have showed you. So that way you can create any set of hierarchies that you want for these members, but not more than 10,000 management groups. Okay, so this was about that. See, what we are doing right now is we are laying down the foundation for the entire environment.